Feudalism Group Project by Maria, Alex, Shannon, Ariel, and Mohammed. An introduction to feudalism. Feudalism is a decentralized organization that occurs when the society's ruler or government becomes ineffective. The government can no longer function as needed and cannot control surrounding forces of power. This means that it affects social, political, and economic factors of the society, in essence. Lords and vassals. The lords owned the land and ruled over it. The land was referred to as a fief. In other words, they were the people who granted the land. And the vassals. They pledged service to the lords in exchange for land and protection. They gave their time and worked the land. Feudalism after the fall of the Roman Empire. Feudalism rose at the start of the Middle Ages because Western Europe no longer had a political system, and they did not have the means to protect themselves from invaders seeking control. There were no laws to protect them, so they turned to the lords to protect them. Feudalism after the fall of the Roman Empire. Feudalism led to a pyramid of power. The kings at the top, then typically lords and nobles, and then at the very bottom was the peasants. The king owned all of the land and made laws. The king also gave fiefs to rich lords and nobles. The lords and nobles provided horses and soldiers to the king. The peasants worked the lands and for the nobles and received protection in return. And this is just a little diagram of the hierarchy of power. King, obviously, at the top. Then comes the lords, and then the knights, and then the peasants. Feudalism across Europe. The practice of feudalism differed between societies in Europe simply because feudalism is very much a loose term to where there are many definitions to it. There are many differing types of feudalism within Europe, but to keep it simple, we'll go over the different types found in the 12th century England and 11th century France. Feudalism in 12th century England. Feudalism in England was well structured, established, and strict. Feudal law required that a fief pay the knight's fee, which is just money that the fief had to pay to support one knight. There were complex relationships between the lords and the vassals, which then created loyalty problems. The hierarchy of power was the king at the very top, then the dukes, knights and lords, then the commoners, and then at the very bottom was the slaves. Feudalism in 11th century France. Now, in France is completely the opposite, I would say, because Feudalism was very undemanding. There was no real guarantee that the contracts between the lords and the vassals were to be honored. The powerful wealthy always took advantage over the weak and poor and had no interest in expanding the middle class. It became so bad that after the French Revolution, they abolished the decentralization of power in feudalism itself. Um, Taking everything into account, the practice of feudalism varied from one European nation to another. However, it had one theme in common: it was dependent on money. The more money the country had, the more disparity existed amongst them. The changes in feudalism. The spread of Christianity also allowed for the spread of feudalism, as it was tied to the higher clergy. Rule by conquest was the way most boundaries and rulers were decided. Uh, Dynastic claims allowed for the continuation of kingdoms and titles that helped maintain the status quo. Marriages among the ruling class help set them apart from the rest of the society. Changes in feudalism continued. As the medieval ages progressed, feudalism slowly started to decline. Peasants became less dependent on the lords, and as the peasants moved out into different territories, the rights of the lords over them decreased. The nobles became weaker in power, and the monarchs eventually gained back their power. In conclusion, feudalism is the problematic modern term that attempts to explain the diffusion of power in medieval Europe regarding economical, political, and social relationships. Lords and vassals had a mutually beneficial relationship in which the lords received service in exchange for fiefs and protection for vassals. Feudalism was the result of the vacuum of power created by the fall of the Roman Empire, since there was no longer a central power in Europe, Western Europe. Feudalism varied across Europe based on the needs of the specific society, but the driving factor was wealth. And here are all of our citations. And that's it. Have a nice day.